You're listening to Season 3 of That's Not How a Baby Sleeps. I'm your host, Alicia Daishon, and I'm joined by my co-host, Eleni Katsinis. We are not your average sleep consultants, no cry it out or sleep training at all for that matter.
Let's start off by saying thank you, Melina, for coming on. We're so excited because what you do is very unique and different than anybody we've ever had on. So I'm so excited to look for myself, to learn more about you and what you do. So can you just start off with explaining exactly what you do and how you do it and, the families that you help?
Absolutely. Thank you. And I'm so excited to be here. I've listened to your podcasts, and sleep is always one of my favorite subjects to talk about. So this is a real treat. So I am the founder of Pueblo, and I founded Pueblo because as a child development specialist who has worked in the field for over a decade, I've seen parents get stuck over and over again in disagreements over good parenting that could be completely transformed if we took a cultural lens to them. Cultural differences are the root cause of so many conflicts between parents, especially in multicultural families. But most coaches, in my experience, coaches, books, educators don't really talk about them. And so at Pueblo, we look at those differences as strengths. And my goal is to help parents shift from those little standoffs about getting on the same page or what it means to be a parent or to parent well, and to find their way back to really enjoying parenting together.
And that's just in the home. You're saying like partners. Are you saying like extended family, friends, like everybody, or more just in the immediate home?
Yeah. So all of it.
Yeah. Okay.
All of it, and I think mostly the work that we do is with partners, but families have all kinds of different structures and all kinds of different people helping raise children. Sometimes it is across, a parent and a grandparent, or parents and a caregiver, or sometimes it's even parents who are having a hard time navigating advice, right? Like somebody that they've hired to advise them and just doesn't quite feel right and they don't know why.
Okay, that's so interesting. So I know you mentioned the tension. So can you give us an example of, I know you just did a little bit and we're going to get more into this, but just like a brief example of that tension, what that looks like.
Definitely. So what it often looks like is just disagreeing over approaches. So on the surface, that can look like parents disagreeing about maybe one parent wants to follow gentle parenting and the other parent isn't sure it's going to work. Or it can be about, one parent feeling like they should wean their child at a certain age and the other parent feeling like, well, that's a decision that the child should lead. It can be about what we think a healthy meal looks like. It can be about whether we should pierce the baby's ears. There's so many different sort of surface examples that I think is usually where we get stuck, is trying to negotiate those things that feel logistical, but there's actually something much deeper underneath. And then also on top of that, there's also some bigger disagreements that I think we recognize as being bigger. So things like what religion to practice if you have different faiths, or how to practice that religion, right? You could have the same faith and have differences of opinion about what that should look like in the home, or how to raise a multilingual kid, or whether you should even try to raise a multilingual kid and what that should look like. And underneath all of those conversations, so whether they feel like they're cultural or whether it feels like we're just talking about, I don't know, ear piercing, right? Is actually, it's culture that's underneath it. And that's why the tension is there, because it really feels personal. It's not, it's not about that surface tension. It's about what's underneath.
Totally. I mean, you're having two totally different families, right? When you get married or when you're together and have children, and you were raised differently, even if it was the same culture, right? It's still differently. So then you have to come together and try to figure out how to raise this child that you want to do together, but you have differences. And I'm sure you see that from newborn up until childhood, right? Because you work with all ages of families and everything.
Yes, absolutely. And the thing is that these are conversations that nobody prepares you for.
Yes.
Because so often we don't even really realize it until the child is there, right? It's like until that moment where you're making a decision about, I don't know, they turned 1 and one of you is like, okay, that means we got to get rid of the bottle. And the other person's like, I had a bottle until I was 5. What are you talking about?
Yeah.
But that's not something you're talking about in like a prenatal class or in like a prepping for parenting class. It comes up as you're doing it. And then it continues again and again and again with almost every decision that you're having to make, which is on a daily basis.
Yep. Until they're 18 years old.
Yep. And sometimes more.
That's very true. So do you work with families that are pregnant that are not even their kids not here yet? Like do you help
Hmm.
have those conversations before baby comes?
Yes, yeah. So Pueblo has had a lot of different sort of versions of the way that we support parents throughout the entire time. We've always had one-on-one consultations. And I've also done a lot of in-person classes. I had pre-recorded classes for a while. I actually just took those down to focus on building a more of a community group project that's going to launch later this year. But I often start working with some families if they've found me before the baby even arrives. And a big part of those really early conversations are actually about like help, like what it feels like to receive help, what it feels like to ask for help, and what they imagine those first few months are even going to look like. Because already in those first few months, there's things that you're deciding that you might have very different ideas about. Everything about like how to feed the baby, how to dress the baby, right? Like, does the baby need socks? And it can get really heated because it's not actually about the socks.
Yeah. So do you help families, I guess, go through that motion of like what's actually underlying, just like you said, socks, like not a big
Hmm.
deal, but all those little things probably really add up into something bigger, right? So you're
Yeah.
helping break that tension and helping like kind of like a
Hmm.
therapist in a way of, right? Of like the underlying causes going on, the triggers,
Hmm.
right? Would you say that?
Yeah, absolutely. So we're doing a lot of digging into what's underneath, and we're doing a lot of building skills of how to negotiate those conflicts when they do come up. So it's a combination of really trying to understand the self and then building those skills for how to understand another person. And then how do you meet in the middle somewhere?
Oh, that's awesome. That's so helpful. I feel like everyone should have you. Everyone should have you. Seriously, like everyone should have that service and just like
Mhm.
working through that because you don't realize how difficult and challenging it is until you're in it, right? Until you're
Yeah.
having, and some of those are little conversations, but some of them are really tough conversations,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
So I'm sure you've seen all of it.
Yes,
Right?
definitely.
Because I know you mentioned some of the examples that you work with families, but I guess what is some of the most common parenting standoffs that you might see between partners?
Yeah. I think two of the biggest ones are sleep. That's a big one.
Yeah,
I
makes
mean, we can
sense.
talk more about that. I can see you nodding because sleep it's a big topic.
Yeah.
It's intense. And then discipline is the other one that is very, very present in the room. And that I think trickles down into a lot of other subjects, end up being about discipline and sort of how to negotiate that in your household. So even things about like, I don't know, whether a child has to finish the food on their plate ends up falling kind of under that umbrella at some point. So I would
Yeah.
say those two are the big common things. And sleep was the thing that brought me to this work.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Like when your own personal journey, you mean? Like with your
Yes.
partner?
Yeah.
Do you want to touch on
Yeah.
that a little bit?
Sure. Yeah, absolutely. So it was with my first daughter. I have two children. I have one who is almost 9, which to me is like mind boggling because I'm sure she's still a toddler, but apparently not. And then I have another one who's 5.5. And with my first daughter, I went into parenting really confidently because I had a lot of experience with babies. I had 2 master's degrees in one in child development and one in infant development. I'd been a nanny. I was one of those kids who was babysitting when I was 12. So
Oh,
I went into it feeling like I kind of knew the lay of the land. And I felt like my husband and I were very much on the same page. And we really were until 4 months, which, in the sleep world, that 4 month sleep progression,
yep.
however we want to think about it, hits a lot of us by surprise. And it did for us. And I remember that was the first moment where both of us kind of looked at each other like, I don't know what to do. And, our baby, who had been an amazing sleeper, all of a sudden was waking, every 45 minutes. And that felt completely unsustainable. And all of a sudden we were, trying to figure out the way. And my mother had never sleep trained. My husband, Mike, his mother had. And so we
Mm.
had both of those stories in the room with us. And thanks to social media, a whole lot of content coming our way about like what we should be doing. And so I think that was the first moment where I felt as a parent really overwhelmed, and where I think both of us kind of retreated into our own corners and got kind of defensive about how we were going to approach it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, that makes sense. I mean, sleep deprivation comes in and you're yelling at each other or
Hmm.
you're saying things that you thought you'd never say, and
Yeah.
it all comes up, especially because you had totally two different parenting, right?
Hmm.
And especially when it came to sleep, which is such a big topic. And that's probably something. Did you guys talk about that
Hmm.
with pregnancy, like how you're going to approach sleep, or did that? not get brought up?
We didn't really talk about it, honestly. I think the most that we talked about it was sort of we're just going to kind of go with the flow and adapt
Yeah.
as it happens. But I think in the back of our heads, both of us had the sense, at least, I know for sure, had the sense that like, I know enough about babies that it's going to be fine. Like we're just gonna meet her needs. But I just didn't expect those needs to be every 45 minutes overnight.
Yes, I know. You don't really know how challenging it is until you're in it. And that's what you
Right.
help families with now. So, how did you guys come to an agreement?
Well, it was a long journey. I think at first, the thing that I knew both of us really aligned on was that we really valued evidence based advice. And so we ended up actually finding a book that someone like one of our friends had suggested to us, that it was presented as evidence based, and it was by two psychologists, and it was presented as this sort of, we know what we're doing now, we have all the information, and it was a sleep training book. And so I think because we knew that we were aligned on the evidence piece and they were using that language, we decided to try it. And we did try it, and it really only drove us apart from each other, right? Because as soon as the baby would start crying, every bone in my body would tell me not to let her cry.
Yeah.
And for him, he felt like, well, that might just be the cost of what it takes to help her, right? And like, our job is to help her grow. And so this is part of it, is holding space for that. And I think, he experienced that as sort of frustration with the baby. I experienced it as resentment of him.
Yeah.
And it didn't work. But more importantly, it really made it hard for us to communicate with each other. Mm-hmm. And so one of the things that ended up really kind of opening my eyes was that a few months after this happened, I actually started teaching a child development class, an infant development class at Bank Street College here in New York. And one of the things that we do is we read a lot of ethnographies. So we read a lot of like anthropological studies. And one of those, and because it's a class on infants, sleep comes up. And one of them is this beautiful book called The Afterlife is Where We Come From. And it's about a study of the Bang people in the Côte d'Ivoire. And they have such a different approach to sleep. That's complete, but they have such a different approach to child rearing entirely, because of the beliefs around, what a child is and where children come from and what the role of the parent is. And it really opened my eyes to how many different ways there are to do things and how many different ways there are to raise babies. And I think as soon as I started getting out of that place of there is a right way, it opened up the possibility for us to have more of a dialogue. Because all of a sudden I was like, okay, well, maybe I don't have to be as attached to my way. Maybe he doesn't have to be as attached to his way. And we can start to find a middle ground.
Nice. So were you already doing this work when you had your daughter? Or this is what led you more to this, what you do today, right?
Yes.
Okay.
So having my daughter is what led me, and going through this experience with the sleep and then teaching this class and realizing how big of a part culture is what really inspired this work.
Yeah. Wow. That's amazing. I mean, sleep is definitely a big topic, like you said.
Yeah.
I mean, when you're working with a family and sleep's the biggest topic and you're helping them navigate through it, how are you helping them through that? Like, how do you get a solution? Are you giving them more of the tools, the talking points, right? You're helping them figure out how to come to a compromise, correct?
Absolutely.
So I guess if you can walk us through that.
Yeah, definitely. So oftentimes the first thing we do is kind of just get things out on the table, right?
Yeah.
So everything from what have you heard? Where did you hear it? What have you tried? What are you scared to try? And then really getting at, oftentimes it's like the fears. Like, what is the fear that you have? If you bring your kid into bed with you, what's scary about that? If you let your baby cry, what's scary about that? Like, what are you sort of projecting into the future? And where does that come from? And I think the more we kind of dig into where people's ideas come from, where their fears come from, where those beliefs come from, about what their responsibility is to the child, what that's supposed to look like. Oftentimes, the deeper we go, it starts to feel like we're further and further and further apart until suddenly we find, oh, there's actually a place where we meet. There's actually something here that, in spite of everything else, we can agree on, right? And even if it's just that, like, we agree that we don't want to harm our child, right? Like, we've tried to get all the way into the depths of the disagreement until we find some meeting point. And then we kind of build back from there. And we start thinking about, okay, well, what might it look like to try this? How would you know it's not working? what would it mean to you that it didn't work? And so it's this process of almost like deconstructing and then constructing it back up.
Nice. Well, that's very helpful because sometimes you do need someone like not in the relationship, right? To like look in and not have so much emotion attached to it, right? Is it hard for you to like help someone in that regards, but you have a strong opinion about something, right? Like, cause I can see myself like, this couple wants to come together and they decide to sleep train and I'm just sitting there like cringing, like having, you know what I mean? Cause I feel so strongly about this and I know you feel so strongly about certain ways and like attachment, right? And like science and this stuff. So do you feel like you just need to take a step back and just don't share? Like, do you share your own beliefs? Like, do they appreciate hearing that? Or is it more you have to just be biased?
I think it depends. It depends on what the conversation can hold. So it's different for every conversation that I have with people. Sometimes I feel like it's really necessary for me to share my own opinion and sort of my own belief. I think I'm always trying to be very aware of what those are and how they're coming up for me. Even if I'm not sharing them, I'm constantly reflecting for myself, like, oh, okay, I'm judging this. Let me step back. I'm judging that. Ooh, okay. I had a strong reaction. What was that about? In part because I think it's really necessary for me to do that. And there is some amount of play there, right? Of like sharing something and then kind of waiting and seeing how it lands, and there are moments also that are hard. I definitely feel like sometimes the right approach for one family is an approach that I would never use in my own home, and so there's this, there are conversations where I feel like we can go through all of it and I'm like, okay, that is right for you and it's not right for me. And part of that has to do with who the children are, but also the circumstances, right? How much support does this family have? How, what are their working hours? What is their life like? How many siblings are there? What is actually reasonable and possible? And so there's always this, a lot of factors, there's a lot of factors to balance, and also noticing like, where is a family ready to go? And I think one of the things that helps me the most is knowing that it's a long journey. And so, whether they're ready at this point to try something different might not be important. They might be ready 3 months from now, or they might be ready a year from now. And so I try to really work on building the relationship between us and between them so that people can continue growing.
Yeah, and they have to trust you, right? I mean, they want to have a good relationship and trust you. And obviously, I know the work that you do is also like respecting each other and their families and everything. Even if you don't fully agree with someone or something, how they're doing it, it's about that mutual respect, right? Which I'm sure you have to do that a lot with the families that you work with, and same with them to you, because they, like you said, you're not going to always agree on the same thing or do the same thing in your family.
Yeah. And I would say that there are certainly red lines, right? Like there's definitely boundaries that I have that I would say very clearly to parents, I don't think that's okay.
Yeah.
I think that is harmful. There's definitely things that I've had to say before where I think it's important to have that clarity. It's not, especially if things, if we're trending towards talking about things more that could border on abuse, right? And I don't know, because I'm not in the home, what that actually looks like when you're carrying it out. But if you're describing something to me that suggests that it could get there, I'm going to make sure that that's not okay. But so often we're talking about other differences, right, that feel really big, but that still fall under the umbrella of caring for a child.
I know you mentioned to me that there's like a parenting camp, right? That like they feel like they have to pick from. So there's like a pressure to pick one side or the other. Can you explain that to us a little bit more? Because I never heard that term before, which is, I think, have you heard it a lot? And like, do you use it a lot? I guess I just want you to explain it more and like why there's this pressure to pick a camp.
Yeah. I think that term actually came from a client of mine.
Oh.
Who suggested it, who's saying, oh, I just feel like I have to pick a camp. And I hadn't really framed it that way until she mentioned it. And then I started seeing it in more places, at least the way that she described it, which had to do with kind of almost like picking an approach, right? And feeling like everything she did had to follow that approach. So a gentle parenting was the camp that this person happened to be talking about. And, I think parenting is so hard.
Yeah.
And parenting the way that it's developed is so hard, where it feels like we're completely responsible for how our children turn out. And it feels really intensive. And it feels like every moment is really high stakes and every decision feels high stakes. And so, when you don't have a great social safety net. And many of us don't have a lot of support from family or community support. I think it becomes extra hard, and it makes sense to want things simplified, right? Like if there's somebody who can tell you this is exactly what you say when your kid is having a tantrum, that feels like a relief, to like, okay, I can say those words. That's okay. I can memorize the script. Great. I can do that. It feels like a relief. And I think parenting camps also give us a sense of being a part of a community. And I think many of us really need that. So it makes sense that we seek them out. I think the place where it gets a little stickier is when we start to retreat into those camps and start to believe that one way of parenting or our way of parenting is better than anyone else's. And so rather than just seeing it as different, when we start to feel like, oh, well, this is, if you don't do it this way, you're wrong, right? And we start to take that sort of moral lens to it. And I think that's when it can get more harmful, because then it prevents relationship building. And then, you know, I've talked to parents before who don't feel comfortable with their child having a play date with a parent who doesn't approach sharing the same way that they do. It's like, well, I get it because I've been in that situation and it's hard. And also we got to build some resilience for like being together.
Oh yeah, totally. And I feel like too, like you're saying, the parenting camps puts this pressure and like labeling on one way, right? Because like you said, there's not just one way to do something. Like, yes, a lot of us want to try to follow that gentle parenting because it sounds lovely and it's helpful. We know the research behind it, but we've talked about this in the past on one of our episodes, putting that label on it. And if you can't fully follow it, you feel like you're failing, right?
Exactly.
And that's putting that pressure. She's having a tantrum. I didn't follow that exact script. Now I'm a horrible parent, or I'm not a gentle parent anymore. And I'm sure, as you've seen culturally, there's no labels in other cultures on parenting or sleeping. It's just called parenting, or it's just called sleeping, right? It's not called gentle parenting or co-sleeping. It's just those things in those cultures. And, you know, obviously in our westernized culture, it's very different. And you're working with families who are coming from all over and who are raising their kids they want to raise, obviously together. But it's hard when it's different.
Absolutely. And you know, the other thing as you were saying that it made me think of is how it also means that we can't, if it feels like we have to accept the whole thing, the whole structure, like all the scripts, all the ways, then it can make it harder for people to feel like they can try something that's uncomfortable or different, right? Because it feels like, well, if I'm going to be a gentle parent, I have to do all of these things, as opposed to like, what if I tried just this? You know, what if I tried just one aspect of it? And maybe that could unlock something for me. But if it feels like I have to buy into the entire ideology, there's more resistance there.
Yeah, totally. Just like with attachment parenting, right? Like you look up attachment parenting or just like attachment style. It's like you have to follow like, what is it? Like the 7 B's, right? Of sleep, of like your baby wearing, your breastfeeding, you're doing all these things. Like, yeah, those are all lovely. But if you're choosing not to do that, it still means you can be an attachment parent, right?
Yeah,
like,
yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And it feels like, and sometimes it's not realistically possible, right? Like you might physically not be able to baby wear.
Yes.
You know, or you might not be able to bed share safely. And then it feels like, well, then I can't do it, right? Or I'm not doing it right. Or you want to wean, right? Like you think like, I'm going to go do I'm going to like let the baby self wean. And then you're 6 months in and you're kind of like, actually, I'm done. What does this mean? And it can it can become a little bit of an identity crisis if you've really bought into the idea that this is the one way to do it.
And it's like okay to change our minds, right? Like we pick a way and it's okay to change a little bit. It's okay to change off course. Our kids are going to adapt and grow. You know, we're all going to change. So I think that's really good reminders to give families, and I'm sure you do too, right? With the families that you work with.
Exactly.
Do you work with families long term, or is it more just like a one-on-one session, then they're off? Or is it, I guess it probably is unique, right, to each family?
It's definitely unique to each family. I would say that the majority of the time we work for at least a few months and sometimes a couple of years.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. You know, and sometimes that in the beginning, it might be more, you know, once a month that we're meeting or every other week that we're meeting. And then sometimes, you know, it becomes a couple of years because we're meeting every 3 months, kind of just to check in because it's helpful. Or sometimes it's just like a one-off and then that is enough. You know, it sort of depends on the family and what kind of support they need.
Wow, amazing.
Yeah.
I know you touched on a little bit with me, like that good parenting narrative. So can you talk more about, like, I guess, shifting parents out of that, you know, standoff around good parenting, and how does the idea of good get in the way?
Yeah. That's such a great question. So I think the idea of good parenting gets in the way because it puts like a moral lens on parenting. And so it becomes about judgment, right? If there's good parenting, then there's also bad parenting. And if you define good parenting really narrowly, then everything outside of that is a problem, right? Everything outside of that becomes threatening. And so I think when we get too focused on good parenting and defining what that is in a very specific way, just even in terms of like, going back to that idea of like the surface behaviors and the surface ways that we parent, defining it in terms of like, I don't know, like we don't do timeouts or something, right?
Yeah.
And it becomes really narrow. And so then it makes it much harder to have dialogue around it because everything else feels wrong.
Yeah.
And so I think that it's important to shift out of that idea of like good and bad and to live in that place of a little bit of more ambiguity, which I get is hard. There's already so much uncertainty in parenting. But I think if we can develop some comfort with that, it's easier to bridge our cultures.
Yeah. It's just another thing of putting a label on something,
Yeah,
right? Like,
exactly.
Oh, I'm not a good mom, or even just like babies. Oh, are they a good baby? Like, what does that even mean?
Yeah.
Oh, it's funny.
Yeah. Yes.
So,
they're a baby.
exactly. So how can parents start having more honest, less defensive conversations about their values, right? Because I'm sure you've worked with families, like partners especially, that are so defensive, right? They feel like they have to defend their side or like really argue against it, right? So what does that look like?
I think it looks like listening. Yeah. I think that in the beginning, especially, I think that is the hardest thing to do, is to really listen both to each other, but also to ourselves, right? I think it's really important to have those moments of self-reflection and to dig into not just sort of our gut reactions, but what's underneath them. And then to make space for our partner to share what's underneath their gut reaction too. I think so often what I see parents doing is we really rush towards looking for evidence, right? We look to back ourselves up. And it's pretty easy to do that because we have the internet. So we can just do a quick Google search and there's an article that we can send, or there's an Instagram post that we can sort of passive aggressively forward and like see what the research says. And I'm guilty of having done that.
Of course.
And so I think when we get to the place of like trying to just build our own case, then we've stopped listening. And we can't get anywhere together if we're not listening to each other. So I think the very first step really is to try to listen and try to see if you can understand what the other person is saying, and not just assume you know what they're saying, or not try to sort of find like a rebuttal, but to see, can you really hear what they're saying? I do think these are skills that people should all have. And one of my hopes, honestly, with this work is that if people can learn to do this within their relationships, in their homes, where the stakes feel really high because it's your child and you want the best for them. And also, ideally, you have, a relationship with somebody who you are committed to try to work things out with, that if we can build those skills here, we can take them out into the world, and we can take those skills out into our communities and into other relationships. So I think there are skills that translate outside of the home, but that I think are really built very intensely in the home, because with parenting, you're making decisions together every day, like every single day. It's a lot of opportunities for practice.
Yeah, throughout the whole entire day and night.
Yep, exactly.
So what does that mutual respect actually look like in a day-to-day, like parenting decisions?
I think it depends on the moment.
Yeah.
I think there's moments where it might look like stepping back, and trusting that your child is resilient and can handle a different parenting approach, and that conversation is best had later. I think sometimes in the moment, it might look like stepping in if you see that your partner is overwhelmed and you're thinking, I know that that's not how they want to be parenting right now. And so I have reserves and I can tap them out. And then I think a lot of it is having those conversations, with your partner, maybe after the kids are in bed, or maybe when you can steal a moment together, which in the early years is hard, but sometimes it's available, and really having these conversations and learning to hear each other.
Yeah, that's so important. I feel like if, like you said, I know it's like the time, you can't really find that time sometimes, especially
Yeah.
when they're very little, or you're in the thick of it or whatever. I know a lot of families, and we do this, me and my partner, we have like weekly meetings, we call it. And I know a lot of people probably do, but if things come up throughout the week that we don't have the chance to have a conversation about it, like write it down and then bring it up later. And it's not like writing down like, this is what really ticked me off that you did today. Just obviously trying in a gentle, like respectful way of your partner, like so you can have those mature conversations and like move forward, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. I mean, you can write it down that way in your note. I just wouldn't say it that way.
Yeah, it might make you feel better too, just to get it out on paper a little bit.
Yeah, I can't believe you.
And then just not tell them.
Yeah, and then you meet with each other and you just go, so tell me more about that thing that happened.
Oh, that's funny.
I think another way that I really try to get at it with families is to have fun conversations, because I think it can feel like these conversations have to be heavy, right? Like they have to be intense. We're looking at like fears, and we're looking at biases, and we're looking at our like deeply held beliefs, or things that we feel really strongly about because they harmed us, or we really loved them and want to pass them on. And so I think it can feel like these conversations always have to be really heavy. But I actually think that a lot of the time, if we have practice having sort of fun, more lighter conversations, you can get at the same thing in a much faster way. So I often have parents talk about things like hypotheticals, like, if kids and adults could trade roles in your house for a day, what would that look like? And so you're not having this heavy conversation about like parents should always demand respect and like children should always obey them. Instead, you're having this fun, like, what do you think would happen? Like, how haywire do you think our day would be if the kids were in charge? And so it gets at the same ideas, but in this place that's like a little bit more fun. Or thinking about like, well, what's the silliest tradition that you grew up with? Or what was an unspoken rule in your house? And how did you know? Right. So these conversations can be more playful. And I think that they can get at some of the same ideas from a place where maybe we're a little bit less guarded.
Nice. I love that. So how does developmental research help families step out of that fear and I guess more into like confidence when they're making these decisions?
I mean, for me, the biggest thing about developmental research that I carry with me that I think really helps me shift out of fear is knowing how resilient kids are and how adaptable they are, and how we're not supposed to get it right all the time. And I think that, and like literally you're not supposed to get it right all the time. Development is really forgiving in that way, and that you're supposed to sort of mess up and mismatch what your kid needs and then repair some of the time, right? You're not even supposed to repair all of the time, because I think that is something that sometimes weighs on people too, is this feeling like, oh, well, if I mess up, I have to notice that I messed up. You're not supposed to all the time in that way. And so to me, that feels amazing, because I know that I'm messing up all the time because we're all humans. And I think the biggest thing about development is that children are supposed to be developing into humans who make mistakes and then learn from those mistakes and then try to do better, And so I think that is really a place that I go to find that forgiveness, that self-forgiveness of, oh, okay, maybe I set a boundary that I didn't really need to, and it didn't really work the way I thought it was going to, but I can learn from that, and we can adapt and we can move on.
Yeah, that's great, because we're showing our children that we're not perfect. Right. Yeah. And we're learning and growing humans too. It's so funny because like Nora will say things like, you're a mom or you're an adult, you're supposed to know everything. I'm like, I do not know everything. I promise you. And I want you to know that I don't know everything. And I am not perfect and I'm going to mess up. And like all these things, like I'll draw something with her. Oh, yours looks perfect. I'm like, no, it doesn't. It's just so funny, how the kids interpret that and stuff.
Absolutely. Definitely. And I think it's so helpful for them. And I think it gives them permission to be human too, and to mess up, and to model for them, well, what does it look like after you mess up, because we are going to. I think all of that is really, really a big part of what helps a human develop.
Yeah. Totally. And I know that you help families, well, parents especially, try to find their way back to enjoying parenting together, right? What tends to steal that joy, especially in the early years?
Trying to control things. I think that is the biggest thief of joy in those early years, is trying to control things. And I've noticed how for so many parents, especially after they have a a second child or a third child and those children are very different from their first, it actually feels a lot easier in a lot of ways. It feels lighter because you realize how much the child is bringing to the table. And so I think with the first child especially, there's such a focus on controlling the outcome. And children just they're doing their best. They're developing and they're going through all of these phases. And oftentimes, as parents, it's mind boggling because it's hard to put yourself in a 1-year-old or a 2-year-old or a 3-year-old's shoes until you see it a second time. And you're just like, well, that's just what a 2-year-old does. Yeah. And I don't have to try to fix it because in a few weeks, they'll probably grow out of it. Same with, that from sleep, right? Like so many times I feel like parents will schedule a consult with me because their baby started sleeping strangely and, they'll book the consult for 2 weeks out. And by the time they show up, they're like, well, it's actually different from what it was. I'm like, I probably would have told you just to wait 2 weeks anyway and see what happens because it's always changing. And I think that the more we try to control it, the more intense every small interaction feels and the more intense that every single decision feels. And it takes you out of the moment. It takes you out of trying to just be present because we end up projecting into the future of like, well, if I let them, I don't know, if I make a second dinner for them tonight, like I'm going to be a short order chef forever, and it's like, well, maybe they just need a little something tonight and that's okay.
Yeah. I feel like there's so many absolutes when it comes to parenting, right? Mm-hmm. Like if you do that, you're going to have to do it forever. Like I promise you're not going to be doing that for your 18-year-old. And if you are, maybe there's something else you can work through or talk about. But you know what I mean? Like it's not going to be absolute. Like it will be okay. Just like you said.
Yeah. And I think that trying to control every moment can feel overwhelming because it's not possible. It's just not possible.
It just robs the joy of parenting anyways, right? Like especially parenthood and like just the tension with your partner and the tension with your kids. Like when everyone's being silly and laughing and doing it together, that's so much more fun, right?
Yeah.
It really is.
It really is more fun. And I do think that, so much of parenting the way that we know it now is about shaping your kid. And I find that one of the biggest shifts or the most impactful shifts for families is to focus instead on how parenthood is shaping you. And I think parenthood should shape us, right? Like it should change us. It should change our perspective. It should change how we see things. And I don't mean that just like as like as like a saying. I mean that like it literally does. Like it reshapes your brain.
Oh my gosh. Yeah.
It really does change you and it should.
Yeah.
And I think if we allow it to transform us, it can make us so much more empathic. It can help us sort of deepen our relationships with each other. And I think shifting the attention away from just focusing on the child can sometimes be such a relief. I think so many parents talk about like losing themselves in parenthood. And I think, well, get back in touch with yourself. Like that can be an amazing way. Like who are you as a parent?
Yeah, that's a really good reminder.
I need it too.
I know. You get the thing. I'm sure you won't need the advice that you give out, right? But you don't follow your own advice. We say this all the time.
Yeah.
So what do you say to parents who feel like this is like a constant negotiation with their partners and it just feels like never ending instead of like connecting? So what piece of advice would you give them?
I'd give them 2 pieces of advice. One is that if it feels constant and it feels like they can't get anywhere, then just the 2 of them, then I would tell them to seek support. Because I think sometimes just having another person in the room is really helpful in terms of being able to negotiate with each other and hear each other out. So I think sometimes that is the best way to go. And if that feels out of reach for whatever reason, then I would suggest writing, honestly, and starting to write out, what if there is like a particular thing that they're finding comes up again and again, like what are your own instincts? Where do they come from? Writing out your hopes and writing out your fear. And the reason that I say writing instead of sort of just talking it through is that I think writing helps you kind of commit to something. It helps you like really find the words as opposed to sort of rambling. And then this sort of stream of consciousness rambling that you don't really attach to any of the words. And writing kind of forces you to really put it on paper, then look at it. And you might look at it and think, actually, that's not at all what I'm thinking. I don't know why that came out. Or you might look at it and think, oh, actually, that's revealing. But I think writing is such a helpful tool in that way. If you feel like you're not yet at the place where you can have dialogue around it, right? I think you have to start with yourself.
That's really helpful. So you mentioned instincts a little bit. So
Mm-hmm.
with parents, I'm sure you get the conversations of like they feel stuck between like following their instincts, but also hearing outside advice, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like there's a lot of external noise and external pressure. So how do you help
Mm-hmm.
families go through that, especially if it's their extended family members giving them that advice, right?
Well, getting in touch with what your own instincts are, I think, is always a good place to start. And part of that is because so many of us don't trust our instincts. And so many of us, we've gotten the message over and over that, feelings are not logical, you don't pay attention to them, or that we are overreactive or oversensitive. And so oftentimes we've been distanced from those instincts. And so even though we have that sort of physical gut reaction, right? Like sometimes you have that physical reaction, you hear your child crying and you're like, my heart is racing, or my hands are sweaty, or whatever your body tells you before you even know it consciously. But I think starting to untangle that and to write out or to clarify for yourself what those instincts are, and where they're coming from, can be a really, really great starting point, because then you can start to notice where they intersect with what you're hearing, right? So if you're nervous that your child is never going to be independent, and there's marketers telling you your child will never be independent unless you do this or that or the other thing, once you start realizing like, oh, they're speaking directly to a fear that I have, you can start to understand, okay, well, maybe I actually have a like, does this product feel right, or this course or this approach or whatever it is, or this advice, right? Because sometimes it's like a well-meaning auntie, or a
Mm-hmm.
well-meaning grandma. You can start to sort of tease out, okay, well, these are the beliefs that I have, and how do they intersect with what I'm hearing, and where does that match and feel like, oh, actually this might be the right approach, or where does that feel like, oh, actually it doesn't feel right, but I'm tempted to try it because I'm coming from a place of fear.
Yeah. Have you
Yeah.
worked with, I know you work with partners and families, like immediate families, but have you worked, let's say, like, I know a lot of families come to us too, just like venting or complaining about like their in laws or like their own parents, right? Like, have you worked with like multiple families? Like, let's say, a mom and then her husband, and then they want to work with the in laws and her
Hmm.
parents because like they're all disagreeing on something. Because, right, it's a
Hmm.
village to raise our
Yeah.
children. So we want our parents and our in-laws kind of trying to be on the same page as us, right?
Hmm.
Because we're all raising this child together. So have you
Hmm.
done work like that, or is it more you're just focused on the immediate family and then they have to do the work with the extended family members?
It depends on every family. I actually have
Okay.
done that.
Oh, nice.
It's more rare. I love it.
I bet.
I love it because it's especially helpful to have everybody in the room, or in the Zoom, as it were, sometimes, because so oftentimes I think we make assumptions about what the other person means. And so sometimes having grandma in the room to say, well, that's not what I mean. Like, I meant this or that or the other thing, is actually really clarifying. And so I really, really love it. I've also worked with families where, the grandma and mom are there, and there's no way that the partner is going to join.
Mm-hmm.
And so there's all kinds of different ways, or in-laws that aren't willing to be a part of the conversation. And so we might have a conversation about, okay, well, how might you start working with them yourselves, right? Because I'm not the person that they're going to hear from. So there's all kinds of different ways. I love it when there's a lot of people in the room. I find it super energizing and fascinating. And I think the conversations can get really interesting really quickly.
Yeah. I can only imagine, especially like we talk about culturally, like there's so many different ways that other babies and children are being raised, right, in different cultures. And it really
Absolutely.
is or was a village, like we're all
Hmm.
helping. And now, like in our westernized culture, it's so different.
Yeah.
Like we're so offended by the advice our moms or our mother-in-laws are trying to
Hmm.
give us, but they raise babies, right? So I
Yeah.
feel like we have to come to like a mutual respect and understanding of that. Like I definitely
Hmm.
get annoyed by my mom, of course we all do, but it's like I have to step back and
Hmm.
like I give her grace. I'm like, oh, you know what, you're going through this for the first time too, right? Like she's a grandma
Hmm.
for the first time. She doesn't
Yeah.
maybe know how to say things or what to say or like what boundaries she can or cannot cross, right? So that's why obviously you would suggest to just start that conversation. That's where you
Yeah.
start.
Yeah. And I think bringing curiosity to it is so important, because there's so many things, like I said before, we make these assumptions or we take things for granted. And, we have our own experience of how we were parented or how we were raised. But it's so enlightening sometimes to hear our parents' experience of the same thing. And I think I've been in the room with a grandparent and a parent before where the parent, they were talking about sleep training, right? And the grandparent had sleep trained and the parent didn't want to, and the parent felt like they had to defend the fact that they didn't want to sleep train, and the grandparent said to them, well, it wasn't actually because I felt that strongly about sleep training. It was just that I had to get up to work every morning and I didn't have another option. And so there's these moments where you find what was behind the way that you were parented, or it was like, oh, well, I did it because the doctor told me I had to. And I actually didn't feel good about it. So I think sometimes if we approach it with curiosity instead of judgment, right? Like this goes back to that sort of like good, bad.
Mm-hmm.
And so if we come at it from a place of like, you did bad things, like I was harmed by that, sometimes that shuts down the conversation. But if you can open it from a place of curiosity of saying, well, why did you do that? Or what was that like for you? Then sometimes you find out things that you're just like, oh, actually, you feel totally different, right? Or the reason you want me to sleep train is because you see that I'm exhausted and you feel bad for me and you want to fix it. And I don't need you to fix it. I just need you to come watch the baby.
Exactly. That's probably so healing for moms and anybody really, just to hear that and like to understand where their mom or mother-in-law, whoever it was, like where they're coming from and why they did it. That must be so healing. Because I feel like just as a society, we're really nervous to have those conversations, right? And to like bring it up because it could get really heavy or it could just be like really awkward and uncomfortable, obviously. But it's great to have someone like you as a mediator just to be there and help guide the conversation. Because I'm sure you've been in heated conversations, I'm guessing.
Yes, I
because
have.
you have a lot of tension. I was curious. So, do you work? I mean, I know you work with families, but do you have children like in the room with you at times? Like, if I guess if parents are having a hard time, maybe having a certain conversation with their child, right? Like,
I generally don't have children in the room.
okay.
Every once in a while, it's happened that a parent has shown up with a child and it's never been helpful.
Oh, okay.
And part of that is that the child doesn't trust me and they shouldn't. They don't know
Yeah.
me, that we don't have a relationship. And so I think with parents, it's easier to build that rapport. But I think I have a boundary around being a face on a computer that tells you something. Like it shouldn't be coming from me. It should be coming from somebody that they trust and that they have a relationship with. So I feel very comfortable talking parents through how to have conversations with their children, but I don't feel comfortable being the person that the child hears something from.
Yeah.
Because they don't know me.
Yeah. Well,
They're
that makes
just
sense.
experiencing me as like a face on a screen.
Totally. And like you said, they're not going to listen to you or respect what you're saying because they're not attached to you.
Yeah, exactly.
Right. And you might not have the time to build that relationship because it's different. But like you said, you give parents the tools to help the child. So obviously you've had those conversations with parents, like if they're having a really difficult time with a certain conversation or a certain topic they want to address with their child, you can help guide them through that.
Yes, absolutely. And the exception is like babies are welcome whenever. Like babies can be in the room, but I'm not talking to them.
Yeah, they don't know what's going on. They're just nursing or hanging out. Exactly. And but like children can hear, right? They can hear what's going on, and you probably don't want to have these heavy conversations around children because they're gonna get this different view of grandma or of somebody else. Like you don't want that, obviously, to happen.
And I want parents to be able to speak freely and to not have to, worry about what their child might overhear.
Yeah. That makes sense. What is we talked about so much, but what is just one small shift that whoever is listening can make just this week to help reduce some tension in their home?
Oh, that's a great question. I think the most important small shift is to release the idea that there's a right way to parent. I think if we can release that and just be in the moment, that can shift so much for us as parents, especially in terms of finding that joy in it, in terms of finding just relief. I think it's so intense to parent, and the idea that we have to do it perfectly or that there's one right way and that we're going to mess it up, I think is really harmful.
Yeah, that makes sense. And I feel like too, just to remember that your partner is your partner and they're not there to, right? Like I always try to remind people that, or even just, just whoever I'm talking to, like they're there to support you and you're a partnership, you're together for a reason and your family unit, like try not to think of it as like a competition, right? Or like, I'm sure you deal with a lot of families that are resenting their partner for the triggers that they're afraid to talk about.
Absolutely. I think one of the funny things that I've had parents do and that my husband and I were doing for a while was that we would start these conversations with like a secret handshake. Like I would have them make up a secret handshake. And it was just like a moment of levity at the beginning to remind us that we're on a team together, right? Like we're here with each other we're not enemies. And so I think having those just like a little ritual sometimes to start those conversations to like bring a little bit of lightness to it and a little bit of like, let's like look at each other in the eyes and know that we're on the same team can be so helpful. Even though it feels silly. I think some parents were like, what are you doing? And I was like, do it. Just do it for me. Just make up a handshake. I know it's going to feel silly, but it actually does shift the energy a lot.
Oh yeah. It doesn't feel as heavy, like you said. And sometimes you do have to have these heavy conversations and they're important, but it's nice to be a little bit light with it for a second.
Yeah, exactly. And like you said, to remember you're on the same team.
Yeah. And for your kids to see that, we know how important that is. So important.
Exactly. So important.
Alicia, do you want to ask any questions? I know I led most of this conversation.
That was great. I love what you do.
Thank you.
I feel like you would be a very, very helpful resource because there's a lot of situations where I've been put in where I'm dealing with a mom and a father and they're not on the same page, and I'm just awkwardly sitting there going, this is not my area of expertise. I'm not a marriage counselor. I can give you the information on sleep. But having you as a resource, I think, is just so important. So I really appreciate you coming and chatting with us today. It's wonderful.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
I know. Just a couple more questions before we officially wrap up. I know you mentioned to me that you are planning on writing a book, or you're writing a book. Can you talk about that, or is it a secret?
Sure. No, I can talk about it. I am in the process of writing a book that will hopefully be out in early 2020. It's about raising multicultural children, but it takes the work that I've been doing with Pueblo and kind of systematizes it and explains it and helps parents do this work on their own, because I can't be in everybody's living room, even though I've been invited into more than, a handful of people's homes.
Wow.
Can you just come live here? I'm like, no, but I'll write you a book and maybe that can help.
Oh, that's going to be amazing. I can't wait. To read that. Melina, where can people find you, learn more about you, and work with you if they wanted to?
Great. You can follow me on Instagram. My handle is Parent Pueblo. That's where I am most active almost on a daily basis, so you can kind of keep up with me there. I also have a Substack called Surface Tension. Words that have come up today. And you can find it on Substack. You can look up Surface Tension, but it's under my name. So Melina Gaklevin. And that is an almost weekly newsletter. It comes out 3 times a month. Once is a conversation with a different multicultural parent. The first newsletter explores a surface tension that parents share. And then the third newsletter of the month is called The Invisible Script. And it gets at what's underneath it and gives parents a prompt for connection. So some of those questions that I think can really open things up for parents, those come midweek and give you a chance to kind of talk about things together. Thank you. Thank you for having me. This is such a fun conversation.
Thanks for joining us. Don't forget to connect with us beyond the podcast. You can find me on all social media platforms at moonbay.sleep. And for more sleepy goodness, you can head over to Instagram and follow Eleni at Rooted in Sleep. Until next week, keep embracing the chaos.